Germany had a secret weapon in the sky that almost gave the Allies nightmares. Imagine an airplane so fast, so deadly at high altitudes, that even seasoned pilots looked up and felt a shiver run down their spine. This wasn't just another fighter. This was the Ta-152, a machine that could have rewritten air combat history if only fate had given it more time. By 1943, the Luftwaffe was feeling the pressure. Germany's once feared air force was losing its grip on the skies over Europe. Allied bombers were flying higher, faster, and with more protection than ever before, while German pilots struggled to keep up. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 had been a workhorse, and the Focke-Wulf 190 had its moments of brilliance, but neither could dominate at extreme altitudes. The high-flying Spitfires and P-51 Mustangs were outclassing most German planes above 30,000 feet. Something had to change. Enter Kurt Tank, a man whose name might not ring bells outside aviation history circles, but inside Germany's aircraft design world, he was a legend. Tank wasn't just tweaking existing designs, he wanted something revolutionary. He envisioned a fighter that could operate in a zone where almost nothing else could follow, a plane that would make Allied pilots think twice before climbing too high. That vision became the Ta-152. The plane itself was a marvel of engineering. Its engine, a supercharged Junkers Jumo 213E, was designed to keep performance high even in thin, icy air. The wings stretched long and sleek, optimized to glide effortlessly at altitudes where the air is almost non-existent. Pilots who flew it said it felt like a dream in the sky, fast, precise, and frighteningly deadly. The armament was equally impressive. One 30mm cannon firing straight through the propeller hub, flanked by two 20mm cannons in the nose with optional underwing mounts for bombs or rockets. You didn't just fly the Ta-152, you wielded it like a spear in the clouds. But building such a plane was never going to be easy. Germany was struggling on every front by 1944. Material shortages were severe, skilled workers were dwindling, and the Allies' relentless bombing campaigns made production a nightmare. Every Ta-152 that rolled out of the factory was a triumph against incredible odds, a testament to ingenuity under pressure. Even then, the plane had its quirks. Its long wings made it prone to bending under aggressive maneuvers, and pushing the engine too hard could lead to overheating at the worst possible moment. Pilots who got the chance to fly it were often blown away by its capabilities. Erich Rudorfer, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced aces, reportedly called it a dream in the sky, unmatched by anything else at 40,000 feet, but even he had to respect its limits. Flying the Ta-152 wasn't a casual joyride. It demanded precision, nerves of steel, and constant awareness of the plane's delicate engineering. Too much stress in the wrong place and the wings could snap. And yet, despite all its brilliance, the Ta-152 faced an insurmountable problem. It arrived too late. By the time it was operational, Germany was collapsing. Allied forces were sweeping across Europe, and the Luftwaffe was hemorrhaging both aircraft and experienced pilots. Only a few dozen Ta-152s ever saw action. Imagine a weapon so advanced, so terrifying in the hands of a skilled pilot, but appearing just as the war was already lost. It's like showing up to a race after everyone has crossed the finish line, brilliant but irrelevant in the moment. There were several versions of the plane. The Ta-152H was designed for high-altitude interception, built to engage bombers and reconnaissance planes in the thin upper atmosphere. The Ta-152C was intended for low to medium altitude fighting and even could carry bombs. Engineers experimented with pressurized cockpits, allowing pilots to survive in altitudes that would have been fatal in most other planes. The landing gear retracted smoothly for maximum speed, and the laminar flow wings reduced drag to keep it cutting through the air like a knife. It was high-tech, ahead of its time, and breathtaking in its ambition. Despite all this, the Ta-152 rarely got the chance to prove itself. One recorded mission involved a pilot climbing higher than a pursuing P-51 Mustang, firing with pinpoint accuracy at an American reconnaissance aircraft before slipping away into the clouds. That fleeting moment showed just how lethal it could be, how it could dominate in a niche where other planes failed. But such encounters were few and far between. Numbers mattered, and the Allies had overwhelming superiority in the sky. A few brilliant planes couldn't change the course of the war when faced with a flood of enemy aircraft and pilots. The story of the Ta-152 is as much about potential as it is about failure. It showed the importance of high-altitude performance in fighter design, a lesson that would influence post-war aviation and even the early jet age. It demonstrated that ingenuity alone isn't enough. Resources, timing, and skilled operators are equally critical. And perhaps most tragically, it revealed how history often passes by the most brilliant ideas when the world is already moving in a different direction. Flying the Ta-152 must have felt like holding lightning in your hands. It was fast, agile, and deadly at altitudes where most planes struggled to breathe. Engineers had pushed the limits of materials and engines, and pilots had to push the limits of their skill to survive. Yet, despite all of this, the war ended before the Ta-152 could make a real mark. For those who did fly it, it was an unforgettable experience, a taste of what might have been if circumstances had been different. The plane remains a symbol of what if in aviation history. It could have been a game changer, a nightmare for Allied bombers and fighters, but instead it became a tantalizing footnote, admired by historians and aviation enthusiasts alike. It's a reminder that even genius can be overshadowed by the timing of events, and that sometimes the most remarkable inventions arrive just a moment too late. If you think about it, the Ta-152 wasn't just a plane. It was a glimpse into the future of air combat. Its long wings, high-altitude performance, and precision firepower were ahead of their time, setting the stage for jets and high-speed interceptors that would dominate the skies in the decades to come. And yet its story is also a cautionary tale. Brilliance alone cannot overcome shortages, collapsing empires, and the relentless march of time. Even today, aviation enthusiasts study the Ta-152 in awe. Scale models, restored engines, and surviving blueprints offer a window into the genius of Kurt Tank and his team. Every detail, from the pressurized cockpit to the way the cannons aligned perfectly with the pilot's sightlines, shows meticulous planning and innovative thinking. It's no wonder that pilots who flew it spoke of it with reverence. In the end, the Ta-152 is one of those rare machines that inspire both wonder and regret. Wonder at the heights it could reach and the damage it could inflict, and regret that such a capable aircraft never had the chance to change history in the way it was designed to. For anyone fascinated by the air battles of World War II, it remains a legend, a ghost in the skies that could have rewritten the rules of combat if only it had arrived a little sooner. And if you thought the Ta-152 was the pinnacle of high-altitude fighting, wait until you see what came next. There's another plane in the war that almost single-handedly changed the game, and its story is even more shocking. By early 1945, the situation for Germany was desperate, but the Ta-152 was finally trickling into the hands of pilots. These were not green recruits. These were some of the Luftwaffe's last remaining aces, men who had survived the grinding air war over Europe and knew the stakes better than anyone. For them, the Ta-152 was both a hope and a gamble. It promised unmatched performance at altitudes where most Allied fighters would struggle, but it was also fragile, rare, and difficult to maintain. One of the first pilots to fly it recalled climbing through clouds into the upper stratosphere. The world below was a patchwork of bombed cities and frozen fields, but above, in the thin air, he felt invincible. The Ta-152 surged upward, the supercharged engine roaring in a way that few planes could match. Its long, slender wings sliced through the sky with precision, allowing him to outclimb pursuing P-51 Mustangs in a way that felt almost unreal. For a moment, it was like the tables had turned. Here was a plane that could finally challenge the dominance of the Allies in the upper atmosphere, but flying it in combat was a different beast entirely. On one documented mission, a Ta-152 pilot spotted a squadron of American reconnaissance planes moving over northern Germany. With the Ta-152's incredible climb rate, he ascended faster than any of the escorts could follow. At 40,000 feet, the world below seemed distant and irrelevant. He lined up on a single reconnaissance aircraft, squeezed the trigger, and fired the Mk-108 cannon. The explosion rocked the sky. The pilot dove away before any Allied fighters could react. It was a textbook intercept, and it showed the Ta-152's potential, fast, lethal, almost untouchable at extreme altitudes. Despite these rare successes, the challenges were immense. Supply shortages meant spare parts were often missing, and every mission carried the risk of mechanical failure. The pressurized cockpit, designed to keep pilots safe in the thin upper atmosphere, was delicate and temperamental. Pilots had to balance their daring with caution. One wrong maneuver, one overstressed wing, and the Ta-152 could turn from a deadly weapon into a deadly trap. The plane also forced pilots to rethink air combat strategies. The traditional dogfighting techniques that worked in the 109s and FW-190s weren't as effective at high altitudes. Maneuvers had to be calculated, speed and energy management became critical, and the pilot had to think several seconds ahead. In many ways, the Ta-152 was a glimpse into the jet age, where speed and altitude often mattered more than turning radius or brute firepower. There were moments of frustration too. Pilots who managed to engage the enemy often found themselves outnumbered. While the Ta-152 could climb higher and dive faster than most planes, the sheer number of Allied fighters meant that any encounter could quickly turn deadly. Some pilots reported chasing a Mustang for thousands of feet, only to have two more appear on their tail. The Ta-152 could survive these encounters if flown wisely, but it was never going to win a war on its own. Engineering-wise, the plane was a marvel. The laminar flow wings reduced drag, the engine's supercharger maintained high output in the thin air, and the alignment of the guns allowed for astonishing accuracy at extreme ranges. Every detail was considered. Fuel injection systems optimized for high-altitude performance, control surfaces tuned for responsiveness without overloading the pilot, and even the canopy designed for minimal distortion in bright sunlight at 40,000 feet. Pilots often said it felt like the plane was listening to their commands, almost alive, responding with precision and power. One of the most remarkable things about the Ta-152 was its versatility. While it was designed for high-altitude interception, it could also be configured for lower-altitude missions. The Ta-152C variant was intended as a fighter bomber, capable of carrying bombs and engaging in ground attacks. This meant that, in theory, a pilot could use the plane in multiple roles, intercepting bombers one day and attacking supply lines the next. In practice, however, there were never enough planes or pilots to fully exploit this flexibility. The human element cannot be understated. By this stage of the war, many German pilots were exhausted, war-weary, and under constant pressure. Flying a Ta-152 was a double-edged sword, exhilarating and terrifying. In some ways, it restored a sense of confidence for these men. For the first time in months, they felt that technology could give them an edge, even if only for a few minutes in the sky. There are accounts of pilots describing the Ta-152 as a bird that could disappear and strike like lightning. One pilot told of climbing above the clouds, diving into a formation of B-17 bombers, firing his cannons, and then vanishing into the upper atmosphere before the escort fighters could react. These stories, though rare, became legendary among the few Luftwaffe units that had access to the aircraft. It was a taste of air supremacy, fleeting as it was. Even as the Allies pushed deeper into German territory, the Ta-152 continued to demonstrate its capabilities in small, dramatic ways. On paper, it was perfect, unmatched speed, altitude, and firepower. In the hands of an ace pilot, it could have been devastating. The problem was scale. With only a handful of planes built and even fewer experienced pilots left, its impact on the war was limited. It's a classic case of brilliance arriving too late, yet the Ta-152's legacy is enduring. Aircraft designers and military historians have studied it for decades, noting how it anticipated future trends in aviation. Long wings for high-altitude performance, pressurized cockpits, supercharged engines, and precise gun placement became common in post-war jet designs. It was a plane ahead of its time, a technological glimpse into what the future of air combat could look like. For those who flew it, the Ta-152 was more than just a plane. It was a companion, a weapon, and sometimes the only thing standing between life and death in the sky. There's a reason pilots spoke of it with awe. It gave them a sense of power, control, and precision that few other planes could match. In the harsh reality of 1945 Europe, that was priceless, even if it came too late to change the outcome of the war. And while the Ta-152 was a marvel, it also highlighted a harsh truth: technology alone cannot win a war. Timing, numbers, strategy, and resources matter just as much, if not more. The Ta-152 was perfect in isolation, but history is rarely kind to isolated perfection. Its story is a reminder that even the most advanced weapon, if it comes too late or in too few numbers, can't turn the tide. Even today, aviation enthusiasts and historians look back at the Ta-152 with fascination. Surviving blueprints, photographs, and restored engines offer a glimpse into Kurt Tank's genius. Every curve, every line, every technical choice tells a story of meticulous planning and forward-thinking design. And while the plane never achieved its full potential, it remains a symbol of what might have been, a peak of piston-engine fighter design on the brink of a new era in aviation. For those who thought the skies were fully mapped by the Allies in 1945, the Ta-152 was a reminder that innovation still had surprises in store. A single pilot, a single plane, and a perfect set of circumstances could have caused chaos among bombers and reconnaissance planes. It was a fleeting nightmare for anyone who encountered it, a ghost in the sky that could strike and vanish before anyone knew what hit them. The story doesn't end here, though. There's still more to explore: how its technical genius influenced post-war aviation, what could have happened if production had been scaled up, and the final missions that showcase the plane's deadly potential. The Ta-152 is a story of ambition, brilliance, and tragic timing, and the next chapter takes us even deeper into its world. By the spring of 1945, Germany was in full retreat, and the skies over Europe were a dangerous place. Allied air superiority was nearly complete, and the Luftwaffe was fighting a desperate, almost hopeless battle. Yet amidst this chaos, the Ta-152 began to carve out a legend of its own. For the pilots lucky enough to fly it, it was a rare chance to regain control, even if only for a few minutes at a time. The plane's operational history was brief but dramatic. One Luftwaffe unit received a handful of Ta-152s, and their first missions were eye-opening. Pilots quickly learned that the aircraft was a predator in the upper atmosphere. At altitudes above 35,000 feet, few Allied planes could follow. Its climb rate allowed it to strike with sudden violence and then retreat into thinner air, beyond the reach of most escorts. It wasn't invincible, but in the hands of a skilled pilot it was nearly untouchable. There are stories of solo missions where a single Ta-152 pilot would engage multiple Allied aircraft. One account describes a pilot climbing above a formation of B-17 bombers, using the plane's speed and altitude advantage to position perfectly. The Mk-108 cannon fired, and two bombers were hit almost instantly. The pilot then banked sharply, using the Ta-152's glide efficiency to escape without sustaining damage. These encounters were brief, lightning-fast, and terrifying for the Allied crews. It's hard to overstate just how much of an edge the plane gave its pilot. When flown correctly, it was as if the air itself was on their side. Yet the operational reality was harsh. There were so few planes, and maintenance was a constant struggle. High-altitude engines were temperamental, superchargers needed constant care, and even small mistakes could ground a plane for days. Spare parts were almost non-existent, and every mission was a test of both skill and luck. Some pilots returned from missions only to discover that their aircraft would be out of service for weeks due to mechanical issues. Flying a Ta-152 was as much about patience and careful handling as it was about aggression in combat. The plane also forced a rethink of Luftwaffe tactics. Traditional dogfighting techniques had limited value at extreme altitudes. High-speed passes, energy management, and vertical maneuvers became critical. Pilots had to anticipate the movements of Allied fighters while taking advantage of the Ta-152's strengths. It was no longer just about turning faster or shooting straighter. It was about thinking ahead, staying calm, and using the plane's unique capabilities to maximum effect. Despite these limitations, the Ta-152's presence had a psychological impact as well. Allied pilots who encountered it often described a sense of unease. Few could match its performance at high altitude, and the suddenness of its attacks added to the fear factor. One American pilot later wrote about being chased by a fighter that seemed to appear out of nowhere, firing devastatingly accurate bursts before vanishing above the clouds. While rare, these encounters left a lasting impression and contributed to the aircraft's reputation as a high-altitude killer. Technical aspects of the plane continued to impress. Its laminar flow wings reduced drag, allowing for smooth, energy-efficient maneuvers. The pressurized cockpit made it possible to operate at altitudes that would have been fatal in other aircraft. Gun placement was precise, with the Mk-108 cannon firing straight through the propeller hub, allowing for accurate fire without complex aiming adjustments. Even small details like fuel injection optimized for thin air demonstrated the meticulous engineering that went into the design. The Ta-152 wasn't just powerful, it was smart. Every element worked together to give the pilot an edge. Still, the clock was against Germany. By late April, the Luftwaffe was fractured. Experienced pilots were dead or captured, fuel was scarce, and aircraft production had been decimated by bombing raids. The Ta-152, despite its brilliance, was too few, too late. Even the best pilots could not change the course of the war with such limited resources. Every sortie was heroic, but also a reminder of the desperate situation. It was a plane designed for supremacy, deployed in a context where survival was already unlikely. The human stories during this period are both inspiring and tragic. Pilots flew missions knowing that the odds were stacked against them. One pilot recounted a patrol over northern Germany where he engaged multiple Allied reconnaissance aircraft. He shot down one bomber and damaged another before retreating to higher altitudes. On the way back, he had to carefully manage his engine to prevent overheating. Landing safely was a victory in itself. These stories weren't rare. They were typical for the few pilots entrusted with this aircraft. Each flight was a combination of strategy, skill, and sheer nerve. The plane's design also hinted at what could have been. Kurt Tank envisioned variants capable of multiple roles: fighter, interceptor, even bomber, each optimized for different altitudes. The pressurized cockpit, the supercharged engine, and the aerodynamic wings were all cutting-edge features that anticipated post-war jet fighters. In many ways, the Ta-152 was a bridge between piston engine dominance and the jet age. It was an engineering marvel built for a world that was already moving beyond it. Even as the war neared its end, the Ta-152 continued to demonstrate its strengths in the hands of those who knew it best. On rare occasions, pilots would intercept Allied bombers, climb above them, and strike with precision. The plane's speed and altitude advantage allowed these pilots to escape before retaliation. It was a fleeting taste of air superiority in a sky otherwise dominated by the Allies. The contrast between the Ta-152's potential and its operational reality is striking. It could climb higher, dive faster, and hit harder than almost any other plane of its time. Yet with so few built and the Luftwaffe in collapse, these advantages mattered little in the grand scheme of the war. The plane's story is a mix of brilliance and tragedy, a technological marvel arriving too late to influence events meaningfully. Historians and aviation enthusiasts have since studied the Ta-152 extensively. Scale models, surviving blueprints, and restored engines reveal the careful thought behind every design choice. Every aspect of the plane, from its pressurized cockpit to its precise weapon alignment, speaks of innovation under pressure. It's easy to see why pilots were both terrified and exhilarated when they climbed into its cockpit. The plane also left a lasting legacy in aviation. Its high-altitude design influenced post-war aircraft, showing the importance of energy management, pressurization, and aerodynamic efficiency. Designers in the jet age took cues from what Kurt Tank and his team had achieved with piston engine technology. The Ta-152 may have arrived too late to change World War II, but it helped shape the future of air combat. By the time the last Ta-152s were deployed, the war in Europe was nearly over. Pilots continued to fly missions, often outnumbered and outgunned, using every advantage the plane offered. Each sortie was a test of skill and courage. The aircraft was fast, agile, and powerful, but even that could not overcome the overwhelming odds. Still, for those who experienced it, the plane was unforgettable, a fleeting taste of what air supremacy could feel like, even in the face of almost certain defeat. The Ta-152 is remembered not just for its technical brilliance, but for the human stories it carried. Pilots who flew it described it as a bird that could vanish and strike with deadly precision, capturing both the thrill and danger of its missions. Every climb, every dive, every engagement added to the legend. The plane was more than steel and engines. It was a symbol of what skill and technology together could achieve, even in desperate times. And even now, decades later, the Ta-152 continues to fascinate. Aviation historians, model builders, and enthusiasts study its design, its missions, and the pilots who flew it. It remains a reminder of the delicate balance between technology, timing, and circumstance, a machine that was brilliant but ultimately too late to leave its mark on history. By the spring of 1945, the end of the war was inevitable. Cities were in ruins, the Luftwaffe was decimated, and the skies were almost entirely under Allied control. Yet for the few pilots flying the Ta-152, the plane still represented a sliver of hope, a tool that could strike fear into the enemy, even if only for moments at a time. One of the last recorded missions involved a Ta-152 pilot intercepting an Allied reconnaissance formation over northern Germany. The pilot climbed above 40,000 feet, feeling the plane respond perfectly to every control input. In that thin, icy air, the engine roared and the wings glided effortlessly. He fired on the bombers with deadly accuracy, damaging two before diving away into the clouds. For a brief, shining moment, the Ta-152 had supremacy. But as he landed, he knew it might be the last time he ever flew this machine in combat. Supplies were gone, maintenance was impossible, and Germany's defeat loomed closer by the day. The operational struggles were almost as intense as the combat itself. Parts were scarce, engines overheated easily, and the few experienced mechanics left were stretched thin. Pilots were often forced to fly with incomplete instruments or engines pushed beyond safe limits. Every flight carried the dual risk of enemy fire and mechanical failure. Some planes never returned, not because of enemy action, but because the delicate systems of the Ta-152 failed under stress. It was brilliant but fragile, a weapon of precision in a collapsing war machine. Even with these challenges, the plane's design continued to impress. Its long wings allowed for smooth, energy-efficient climbs and dives, while the supercharged engine maintained power where other fighters would falter. The pressurized cockpit let pilots survive at extreme altitudes, and the cannon alignment made for deadly accuracy. Kurt Tank's vision had been executed almost flawlessly, a high-altitude predator built for speed, precision, and dominance. Despite these achievements, the Ta-152 could not change the course of history. By May 1945, Germany had surrendered. The remaining aircraft were captured, destroyed, or abandoned. Many Ta-152s never saw combat at all. Those that did became part of a brief, almost mythical legacy, a few moments of terror in the skies before the war ended. The plane had everything it needed to dominate except timing and numbers. It was a brilliant bird, arriving just as the curtain was falling. The human stories from the final missions are both inspiring and heartbreaking. Pilots who survived to fly the Ta-152 often reflected on it as the best plane they ever flew, a machine that felt alive, responsive, and terrifyingly effective. But they also knew its limitations, the fragility, the scarcity, and the knowledge that no matter how well they flew, the larger war was already lost. These pilots returned from each sortie with pride, skill, and sometimes sorrow, knowing they had wielded one of the most advanced piston-engine fighters ever created in the most desperate circumstances imaginable. The Ta-152's legacy extends far beyond its brief operational life. It influenced post-war aircraft design, showing the importance of high-altitude performance, engine supercharging, and pressurized cockpits. Engineers and historians alike study it as a bridge between piston-engine fighters and the jet age, a machine that anticipated trends in aviation that would dominate the second half of the 20th century. Its lessons about innovation, timing, and resource limitations remain relevant even today. For enthusiasts, the plane is a symbol of potential unfulfilled. Scale models, restored engines, and surviving blueprints tell a story of brilliance constrained by circumstance. It reminds us that technology alone cannot win wars. Strategy, resources, and timing are just as important. The Ta-152 achieved near perfection as a machine, but history proved cruel. Its pilots were some of the last to experience the Luftwaffe's once feared power, but even they could not reverse the inevitable. Even now, the Ta-152 inspires awe. It represents the pinnacle of piston-engine fighter design, a glimpse into what might have been if it had appeared earlier or in larger numbers. Pilots speak of it as a dream, a lightning-fast predator in the clouds, capable of vanishing and striking with deadly precision. Historians marvel at its engineering, noting how every detail, from the wings to the supercharger to the cockpit, was carefully thought out to maximize performance. In the end, the Ta-152 is remembered as much for its human stories as its technical brilliance. Each flight was a mix of skill, courage, and calculated risk. Pilots who flew it knew they were handling something extraordinary, a plane that demanded respect and rewarded precision. It was a fleeting glimpse of air superiority in a world dominated by chaos and collapse. The Ta-152 could have changed the skies, but it arrived too late to change the war.